Some wounds never heal, and some mistakes follow you into the wilderness. Sam Calder knew both truths better than most men. At 58, he lived alone in the Montana mountains, far from the world that had taken everything from him. The former Marine had built his life around silence and solitude. Then a wounded husky stumbled into his camp, bleeding in the snow with fear in its eyes. Sam almost walked away. He'd seen enough suffering for one lifetime. But something made him help the dog and follow its trail through the forest. What he found changed everything, a hidden cabin with smoke rising from the chimney. Inside, chained to the wall, was a young man who claimed to be the grandson Sam never knew existed. As snow began to fall and dark secrets surfaced, Sam faced an impossible choice. Could he finally fight for the family he thought he'd lost forever? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning mist clung to the valley floor like old ghosts refusing to leave, and Sam Calder figured that was fitting enough. He'd been living with ghosts for the better part of 2 decades, ever since he'd come home from Afghanistan, to find his world scattered like leaves in a hard wind. The cabin he'd built with his own hands sat perched on a rocky outcrop, 30 miles from the nearest road and a lifetime away from the man he used to be. Sam stepped onto his porch, coffee steaming in the crisp October air, and surveyed his domain. The morning ritual never changed. Coffee first, then a scan of the tree line for movement, checking the wind direction, noting which way the smoke from his chimney drifted. Old habits from the Corps, his drill instructor would have said. Old paranoia, his ex-wife would have corrected, back when she still bothered to correct him about anything. The mountains didn't judge, though. They simply endured, weathering storms and seasons with the kind of patience Sam had never managed with people. Out here, among the lodgepole pines and granite peaks, he'd found something resembling peace. Not the kind of peace the VA counselors had promised, that remained as elusive as morning fog, but a working arrangement with solitude that kept the worst of his demons at bay. His nearest neighbor lived 18 miles east, a widow named Martha Henley, who ran a small ranch and minded her own business. They'd nod to each other at the monthly supply run to Whitefish, exchange pleasantries about weather and wildlife, but never cross the invisible line into personal territory. That suited Sam fine. He'd learned that caring about people only gave fate more ways to hurt you. The husky appeared at the edge of his clearing just as Sam finished his second cup of coffee. At first, he thought it might be a wolf. They'd been ranging closer to human settlements lately, following the deer herds down from the high country. But as the animal limped into view, Sam could see the distinctive markings and build of a domestic dog, though this one carried itself with the wariness of something truly wild. Blood matted the fur along its left flank, and its blue eyes held the intelligence that made Sam's chest tighten with unwanted recognition. Those were the eyes of a survivor, someone who'd seen too much and trusted too little. Sam knew those eyes because he saw them in his mirror every morning. Well, hell, he muttered, setting down his mug. The last thing he needed was another responsibility, another living thing depending on him. He'd failed at that before, spectacularly and permanently. The dog stopped 20 feet away, ears pricked forward, but body tensed for flight. It studied Sam with the same careful assessment Sam had once used to evaluate potential threats in hostile territory. Neither moved for several long minutes, 2 damaged creatures taking each other's measure in the thin mountain air. Sam's military training had taught him to read situations quickly, to assess risks and make decisions based on incomplete information. The dog was hurt, possibly badly. It had sought out human contact despite obvious fear, which suggested desperation. And something about its behavior, the way it kept looking back toward the deeper forest, indicated it hadn't come alone. "You're not from around here, are you?" Sam said quietly, his voice rusty from disuse. The nearest neighbors with dogs lived too far away, and this animal had the lean build of a working breed, not the soft lines of a suburban pet. The husky's ears twitched at his voice, but it didn't retreat. If anything, it seemed to lean forward slightly, as if Sam's words had confirmed some hope it had been carrying. That small gesture of trust hit Sam harder than he'd expected. He'd forgotten what it felt like to have something look at him with hope instead of fear or disappointment. Moving slowly, Sam descended the porch steps. The dog tensed but held its ground, even when Sam knelt in the pine needles 15 feet away. This close, he could see the full extent of its injuries, deep scratches along its ribs that looked suspiciously like claw marks, and a gash near its shoulder that would need cleaning and stitching. Tangled with something bigger than you, didn't you? Sam observed. The wounds were fresh, maybe a day old, and despite the blood loss, the dog's eyes remained alert and focused. "Whatever got you, you gave as good as you got." The husky whined softly, a sound that somehow conveyed both pain and urgency. It took a tentative step towards Sam, then another, until it was close enough that he could smell the copper scent of dried blood and the musk of deep forest on its coat. Sam had always been good with animals. Growing up on his grandfather's ranch in Wyoming, he'd learned that patience and calm could accomplish more than force or loud voices. Animals responded to authenticity in ways people often couldn't, cutting through pretense to the heart of who you really were. This dog seemed to recognize something in Sam that even he wasn't sure existed anymore. "All right," Sam said, extending his hand palm up for the dog to sniff. "Let's see what we can do about those cuts." The husky's nose was cold and wet against his palm, its breath warm in the mountain chill. Up close, Sam could see this was a female, probably 3 or 4 years old, with the kind of thick coat that suggested northern breeding. Her collar was leather, well made but worn, with no visible tags or identification. Leading the dog to his workshop behind the cabin, Sam gathered his veterinary supplies, a holdover from his ranching days when treating injured livestock was part of daily life. The husky submitted to his ministrations with remarkable patience, only flinching when he cleaned the deeper wounds with antiseptic. "You're tougher than you look," Sam murmured as he worked, his hands steady despite the years since he'd last done this kind of field medicine. "These scratches tell a story. Bear maybe, or a big cat. You were protecting something, weren't you?" As if responding to his words, the dog lifted its head and looked toward the forest with unmistakable urgency. It whined again, a sound that seemed to carry layers of meaning. Pain, yes, but also worry and a desperate need to return to something or someone. Sam finished bandaging the worst of the wounds and sat back on his heels, studying the animal that had wandered into his carefully ordered solitude. Everything about this situation felt wrong, like pieces of a puzzle that didn't quite fit together. Dogs didn't just appear in the deep wilderness alone and injured. They came from somewhere, belonged to someone. "Where's your family, girl?" he asked. Though he already suspected the answer wouldn't be simple, the husky struggled to her feet, favoring her injured side, but moving with determined purpose toward the tree line. She looked back at Sam expectantly, as if asking him to follow, then took several more steps into the forest before stopping again. Sam felt the familiar weight of decisions settling on his shoulders. He could let the dog go, return to his coffee and his solitude, and pretend this morning had never happened. That would be the smart choice, the safe choice. Or he could follow where this wounded animal led him, knowing that some paths, once taken, changed you in ways you couldn't predict or control. The rational part of his mind catalogued all the reasons to stay put. He'd built his life around avoiding complications, steering clear of situations that might drag him back into the world he'd left behind. Following an injured dog into unfamiliar territory was exactly the kind of impulsive decision that led to trouble. But as the husky limped another few steps away and looked back with those knowing blue eyes, Sam felt something stir in his chest that he'd thought was long dead. It might have been curiosity or duty, or just the stubborn refusal to let something suffer when he had the power to help. "Damn it," he said quietly, and went to get his rifle. The husky led Sam deeper into the forest than he'd ventured in months, following game trails that wound between massive Douglas firs and over granite ridges slick with morning dew. Despite her injuries, the dog moved with purpose, stopping occasionally to ensure Sam was following, but never wavering from her chosen path. The terrain grew rougher as they climbed, the familiar landmarks of Sam's territory giving way to wilderness he'd never bothered to explore. Sam's military training kicked in automatically, noting wind direction, memorizing landmarks, calculating the distance back to his cabin. The 3006 felt comfortable in his hands, a weight that had become as natural as breathing during his years of hunting these mountains. But something about this journey felt different from his usual solo expeditions. The husky's urgency was infectious, and Sam found himself scanning the forest with renewed alertness. After an hour of steady climbing, the dog stopped at the crest of a wooded ridge and began to whine softly. Sam moved up beside her, following her gaze down into a narrow valley he'd never seen before. Nestled among the trees, partially hidden by the natural curve of the land, sat a small log cabin with smoke curling from its chimney. "Well, I'll be damned," Sam muttered. In all his years roaming these mountains, he'd never stumbled across another dwelling. The cabin was old but well-maintained, built in the traditional style with hand-hewn logs and a stone foundation. Solar panels glinted on the roof, and a small vegetable garden showed signs of recent tending. The husky whined again, more urgently this time, and started down the slope toward the cabin. Sam followed more cautiously, his rifle ready but not aimed. Whoever lived here had gone to considerable trouble to remain hidden, which raised questions about their reasons for isolation. In his experience, people who disappeared into the wilderness fell into two categories: those running from something and those protecting something. Neither type appreciated unexpected visitors. As they approached the cabin, Sam noticed details that made his military instincts prickle with unease. The windows were covered with heavy shutters from the inside, despite the fact that natural light would be precious in this heavily forested location. A few chickens pecked in a wire enclosure, but there was no sign of human activity despite the smoke from the chimney. Most telling was the silence. No radio, no voices, no sounds of normal daily life. The husky bounded up to the cabin's front door and began scratching at the wood, whimpering with increasing desperation. Sam approached more slowly, noting the sturdy construction of the door and the multiple locks visible along its frame. This wasn't just a wilderness retreat, it was built like a fortress. "Hello?" Sam called out loud enough to be heard inside, but not so loud as to seem threatening. "Your dog's been injured. I've patched her up, but she led me here." Silence answered him, though he could swear he heard movement inside, a scraping sound, as if someone was trying to be quiet, but not succeeding entirely. The husky's whining grew more frantic, and she began pawing at the door with increasing desperation. Sam tried the door handle and found it locked, as expected. But as he stepped back, something caught his eye, scratches in the wood around the lock fresh enough that wood shavings still littered the ground below. Someone had forced this door recently, and not gently. The wrongness of the situation crystallized in Sam's mind like ice forming on a winter pond. An isolated cabin with multiple locks, forced entry, an injured dog desperate to get inside, and silence where there should have been human activity. Every instinct honed by years of combat and survival was screaming that he was walking into something dangerous, but the husky's distress was too genuine to ignore. She wasn't just trying to get home, she was trying to reach something or someone inside that cabin. Something that mattered enough for her to seek help from a stranger. Sam circled the cabin, looking for another way in. The back door was secured with a heavy padlock, and the shuttered windows showed no gaps large enough to see through. But near the rear of the structure, he found something that made his blood run cold. Dark stains in the dirt that looked suspiciously like dried blood, and drag marks leading from the cabin toward a small outbuilding. The shed was newer than the cabin, built with the same attention to security, but serving a very different purpose. As Sam approached, he could hear something from inside, a rhythmic sound like metal striking wood, faint but persistent. The shed's door stood slightly ajar, and through the gap, Sam could see movement in the shadows within. The husky had followed him around the cabin, and now she sat by the shed door, whining continuously. Her message was clear. Whatever she'd brought him here to find was inside that building. Sam approached the door with his rifle raised, every sense alert for danger. The metallic tapping continued, regular as a heartbeat. And beneath it, he could hear something else, the sound of labored breathing and what might have been muffled words. He pushed the door open with the barrel of his rifle and stepped inside, letting his eyes adjust to the dim interior. What he saw made him lower his weapon in shock and disbelief. A young man, probably in his early 20s, was chained to the far wall of the shed. Heavy links of steel secured him at both wrists and ankles, with enough slack to allow him to sit or stand, but not enough to reach the door. He was painfully thin, his clothes torn and filthy, and his dark hair hung in matted tangles around his face. But it was his eyes that stopped Sam cold, blue eyes that held the same intelligence and wariness Sam had seen in the husky, and something else that made his heart skip a beat. Those eyes were familiar in a way that reached back through decades of memory. The young man had been using a small piece of metal, probably torn from his chains, to tap against the wooden wall. When he saw Sam, he stopped his desperate signaling and stared with a mixture of hope and terror. "Please," the young man whispered, his voice hoarse from disuse or shouting. "Please, you have to help me. They'll be back soon." Sam found himself unable to move, unable to speak, as his mind tried to process what he was seeing. The bone structure of the young man's face, the set of his shoulders, even the way he held his head, all of it was achingly familiar. It was like looking at a ghost or a photograph come to life. "What's your name?" Sam managed to ask, though he was afraid of the answer. The young man's eyes never left Sam's face as he answered. Danny Calder. "And if you're who I think you are, you're my grandfather." The words hit Sam like a physical blow, driving the air from his lungs and making the world tilt around him. Calder, the name he'd carried through war and loss, the name his daughter had borne before she disappeared into the maze of addiction and bad choices that had ultimately claimed her life. Or so he'd thought. "That's impossible," Sam said. But even as the words left his mouth, he could see the truth written in the young man's features. This was Sarah's child, the grandson he'd never known existed. "Sarah died 5 years ago. Overdose." Danny's expression shifted from hope to desperate urgency. "She didn't die. She's alive, but she's in trouble. Bad trouble. And the men who took me, they're looking for her. They think you know where she is." The shed seemed to spin around Sam as the implications crashed over him. Sarah alive, a grandson he'd never met, been dangerous enough to chain a young man in a wilderness shed. And somewhere in the middle of it all, the daughter he'd failed to save was still out there, still in danger. "Who took you?" Sam asked, though he was already moving toward Danny, examining the chains that held him. "I don't know their names. They grabbed me 3 days ago from my apartment in Missoula. They kept asking about Sarah, about where she was hiding. When I told them I didn't know, they brought me here." Danny's voice cracked with exhaustion and fear. "They said if I was lying, they'd make me tell the truth. And if I wasn't lying, they'd use me as bait." Sam pulled out his knife and began examining the chains, looking for weak points. The metal was heavy gauge, designed to hold much more than a malnourished young man, but the brackets securing them to the wall showed more promise. Someone had installed them quickly, without the patience for proper anchoring. Bait for what? Sam asked, though he was beginning to understand. "For you. They said Sarah would come for me and you'd come for Sarah. They said family always comes for family, eventually." Danny's eyes met Sam's with devastating clarity. They were right, weren't they? As Sam worked to free his grandson, his mind was already racing ahead to the implications. Whoever had taken Danny knew enough about the Calder family to understand their connections, which meant they'd been watching and planning for some time. They knew about Sam's isolation, about his skills, and they'd calculated that family loyalty would override his careful distance from the world. They'd been absolutely right. The first bracket came loose with a screech of tearing wood, and Danny's left hand was free. As Sam moved to the second chain, the husky outside began barking frantically, not the earlier whining, but the sharp, urgent bark of an animal detecting immediate danger. "They're coming back," Danny said, his voice tight with terror. "We have to go. Now." Sam freed the second chain and helped Danny to his feet, noting how the young man swayed with weakness. 3 days of captivity had taken their toll, but there was no time for gradual recovery. Through the shed's small window, Sam could see movement in the trees. At least 2 figures approaching the cabin from the direction he and the husky had come. "Can you run?" Sam asked. Danny nodded, though his legs trembled with the effort of standing. "I'll manage. But we can't go back the way you came." "They'll have that route covered." Sam's military training kicked into high gear, assessing their situation with the cold clarity that had kept him alive through multiple deployments. They were outnumbered by an unknown margin in unfamiliar territory, with a civilian dependent who was in no condition for extended evasion. The smart tactical choice would be to leave Danny and retreat to his own territory, where he held every advantage. But as he looked at his grandson's face, Sarah's, eyes and a stranger's features, Sam realized that the smart choice was no longer an option. Family changed the equation, even family you'd just discovered. Especially family you'd just discovered. "Stay close," Sam said, shouldering his rifle and leading Danny toward the back of the shed. "And whatever happens, keep moving." The husky had stopped barking and was now pressed against the shed wall, her ears flat against her head. Through the thin walls, Sam could hear voices approaching, low, professional tones that suggested these weren't random criminals, but something more organized and dangerous. As they slipped out the back of the shed and into the dense forest beyond, Sam caught fragments of conversation that confirmed his worst fears. Dog came back. "Someone's been here. Check the shed." Behind them, a shout of anger and alarm erupted as their pursuers discovered the empty chains. Sam pushed Danny ahead of him into the trees, following the husky, who seemed to know exactly where she was going. The chase had begun, and Sam was no longer running just from his past. He was running toward a future he'd never imagined, carrying the weight of family he'd thought was lost forever. The husky led them through terrain that seemed designed by nature to confuse pursuers. Dense thickets of mountain laurel, rocky slopes where footprints wouldn't show, and creek beds that would mask their scent. Sam found himself grateful for the dog's wilderness knowledge as they put distance between themselves and the cabin. Danny stumbled frequently, his weakened legs struggling with the uneven ground. But he never complained or asked them to slow down. After 30 minutes of hard travel, the husky stopped beside a fallen log and looked back at Sam expectantly. The message was clear. This was a good place to rest and regroup. Sam helped Danny sit on the moss-covered trunk and took his first good look at his grandson in daylight filtered through the forest canopy. The family resemblance was undeniable once you knew what to look for. Danny had Sarah's eyes and Sam's own stubborn jawline, but there was something else in his bearing, a quiet strength that reminded Sam of his father. The boy had been through hell, but he wasn't broken. That said something important about his character. "We need to talk," Sam said, settling beside Danny on the log. "Start from the beginning. How long have you known about me?" Danny rubbed his wrists where the chains had left angry red marks. "Sarah told me about you when I turned 18. Said you were career military, served in Afghanistan. She said you came home changed, that you and she fought about everything, and eventually you just left." He looked up at Sam with careful assessment. "She also said you were the toughest man she'd ever known, and that if anyone could help us, it would be you." Sam felt the familiar weight of old guilt settling on his chest. "I didn't leave her. She left me. Drugs, bad boyfriends, stealing money for her next fix. I tried to help, but she was too far gone," Danny finished quietly. "Yeah, she told me about that part too. Said she put you through hell before she figured out how to get clean." The words hit Sam like a physical blow. "Clean? Sarah's clean?" 3 years now. Has been since she found out she was pregnant with my little sister." Danny's voice carried a mixture of pride and protectiveness. "She's been working as a nurse in Spokane, trying to rebuild her life. That's where this whole mess started." Sam felt the world shift around him again. Not only was Sarah alive and clean, but he had another grandchild he'd never met. The mathematical impossibility of it all made his head spin. Danny was clearly in his early 20s, which meant Sarah had been pregnant when she disappeared from his life. She'd been carrying his grandchild while he'd been writing her off as a lost cause. "Tell me about these men," Sam said, pushing his personal revelations aside to focus on the immediate threat. "What do they want with Sarah?" Danny's expression darkened. "Sarah works at Sacred Heart Hospital. About 2 weeks ago, she was assigned to a patient who'd been brought in after a car accident. Gunshot wounds, but the story didn't add up. She started asking questions. And then she recognized him from a news report about a missing federal witness. The pieces began clicking together in Sam's mind, with the systematic precision of a rifle being assembled. Witness protection. She thinks so. The man kept asking for someone named Agent Morrison, but the hospital had no record of any federal contact. Sarah got suspicious and did some digging on her own time, found out the patient's real identity, discovered he was supposed to be in federal custody. Danny paused, glancing around the forest as if expecting their pursuers to emerge from behind every tree. That's when things got scary. Sam pulled out his water bottle and handed it to Danny, noting how the young man's hands shook slightly as he drank. 3 days of captivity would do that to anyone. But there was more here. The bone-deep exhaustion of someone who'd been living with fear for longer than just a few days. Sarah started noticing cars following her home from work. Danny continued. Phone calls where no one spoke when she answered. Then someone broke into her apartment while she was at work, didn't take anything valuable, just went through her papers. He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. She called me, told me to pack light and meet her at a safe house she'd arranged. But they grabbed me before I could get there. The husky, who had been standing guard at the edge of their small clearing, suddenly tensed and looked back the way they'd come. Her ears pricked forward, and a low growl rumbled in her throat. Sam was on his feet instantly, rifle ready, motioning for Danny to stay low behind the fallen log. Through the forest, Sam could hear the distant sound of men moving through underbrush, at least 2, possibly 3, traveling with the careful deliberation of people who knew their business. They were following the trail, but not quickly, which suggested they were being methodical rather than desperate. "Can you keep moving?" Sam whispered to Danny. Danny nodded, though Sam could see the effort it cost him to stand again. The husky was already moving, picking her way carefully through the trees toward higher ground. Sam knew this terrain well enough to understand her strategy. If they could reach the ridgeline, they'd have multiple escape routes and better defensive positions. They moved in silence for another 20 minutes, Sam bringing up the rear and occasionally stopping to listen for pursuit. The men behind them were skilled, but they were following a trail through unfamiliar territory, while Sam was operating in his element. Every fallen tree, every hidden stream, every game trail was part of a map he'd been building in his mind for years. As they climbed toward the ridge, Danny began to falter more noticeably. His breathing was labored, and despite the cool mountain air, sweat beaded on his forehead. Sam called a halt beside a small spring where they could refill their water, and Danny could rest without losing too much time. "There's something else," Danny said between gulps of cold spring water. "Something Sarah discovered about that patient. She thinks he wasn't just a witness. She thinks he was a federal agent working undercover. And whoever shot him, they wanted him to disappear permanently." Sam felt the familiar chill of recognition that came with understanding just how deep a hole they'd fallen into. A missing federal agent meant multiple agencies would be involved, along with whoever had been trying to kill him in the first place. It meant Sarah hadn't just stumbled into the wrong place at the wrong time. She'd uncovered something that powerful people wanted to keep buried. "Where is Sarah now?" Sam asked. "I don't know. After I was taken, she was supposed to go underground, find somewhere safe to wait. But if these guys have been watching our family for weeks, they probably know more about our connections than we do." Danny's voice carried the weight of terrible possibility. What if they already found her? The husky suddenly lifted her head, ears swiveling toward the sound of voices carried on the wind. Closer now, close enough that Sam could make out individual words if he strained to listen. Professional voices, calm and patient, discussing search patterns and terrain features with the vocabulary of people who'd done this before. Sam helped Danny to his feet, his mind already calculating distances and possibilities. His cabin was still miles away, but there were other options. Old hunting camps, natural shelters, places where they could hole up and plan their next move. But first, they needed to understand exactly what they were dealing with. "Those men back there," Sam said, as they resumed their climb toward the ridge. "Did you get a look at them? Hear any names?" Danny shook his head. "They kept their faces covered, never used names around me. But they moved like soldiers, you know, like they'd done this kind of thing before. And they had equipment, radios, GPS units, night vision gear. This wasn't some random kidnapping for ransom." Sam processed this information as they walked, his military experience cataloging the implications. Professional kidnappers with government-grade equipment suggested either federal agents operating outside their authority or private contractors with serious backing. Either way, it meant they were dealing with people who had resources, training, and probably legal cover for their actions. As they reached the ridgeline, the husky stopped and looked back one more time, her intelligent eyes meeting Sam's with what seemed like satisfaction. She'd done her job, brought help to her family and guided them to safety. Now her expression seemed to say, the real work could begin. Sam looked out over the valley spread below them, seeing his peaceful mountain retreat with new eyes. Somewhere out there, his daughter was hiding from people who wanted her dead for doing the right thing. His grandson had been tortured and used as bait in a game Sam was only beginning to understand. And the life of careful isolation he'd built over the past 20 years was about to be tested in ways he'd never imagined. But as he watched Danny straighten his shoulders and prepare for whatever came next, Sam felt something he hadn't experienced in decades, the fierce, protective instinct of family loyalty. For the first time since coming home from the war, he had something worth fighting for that wasn't just about survival. The hunt was on, but now Sam Calder was no longer just the prey. From the ridgeline, Sam could see for miles in every direction, rolling mountains covered in dense forest, with only the occasional glint of water or clearing to break the endless canopy of green. It was beautiful country, but more importantly for their current situation, it was defensible country. The terrain favored anyone who knew it well over those who didn't, and Sam had been learning these mountains for 20 years. He led Danny to a natural shelter formed by an overhang of granite, where they could rest without being visible from below. The husky immediately began exploring the area, her nose working overtime to catalog the scents and sounds of this new location. Sam appreciated her thoroughness in hostile territory. Every sense was a potential early warning system. "We need to figure out our next move," Sam said, settling against the rock wall with his rifle across his knees. "Those men down there aren't going to give up, and they'll have backup coming soon." Danny nodded, though Sam could see exhaustion weighing heavy on the young man's shoulders. "Sarah gave me a phone number, said if anything happened to use it only once, from a secure location. It's supposed to reach someone who can help. Federal contact?" She wasn't sure. "Said it came from the patient, Agent Morrison. He gave it to her right before he disappeared from the hospital." Danny pulled a small piece of paper from his pocket, the number written in Sarah's careful handwriting. "But if these guys have been monitoring our communications, using any phone might be walking into a trap." Sam studied the number, his mind working through the tactical implications. A phone call would reveal their location to anyone monitoring cellular traffic, but it might also bring help from whatever agency was trying to protect the missing agent. The question was whether they could trust that help, or if it would just bring a different kind of danger. The sound of rotors in the distance interrupted his thoughts. Sam and Danny both looked up to see a helicopter circling the valley below, moving in the systematic pattern of a search operation. It was too far away to make out details, but the deliberate nature of its flight path suggested professional operators with sophisticated equipment. "They're bringing in air support," Sam observed grimly. "That changes things significantly. The husky had frozen at the sound of the helicopter, her body tense and alert. But instead of fear, Sam read focused attention in her posture, the same alertness she'd shown when leading them to the cabin. She was tracking the aircraft, but not as prey tracks a predator. More like a scout monitoring enemy movement. "There's something else," Danny said, his voice barely audible over the distant rotor noise. "When Sarah called me that last time, she said she'd made copies of everything. The patient files, her research notes, everything she'd discovered about the missing agent case. She hid them somewhere safe, said if anything happened to her I should make sure they got to the right people." Sam felt a cold certainty settle in his stomach. These men aren't just after Sarah to keep her quiet. They're after those files, which means they'll keep coming until they get them, or until— Danny didn't finish the sentence, but Sam understood. Until they eliminated everyone who knew about the conspiracy they were trying to hide. The helicopter's search pattern was bringing it closer to their position, and Sam could now see it was a civilian aircraft, black, with no visible markings. The kind of anonymous transport favored by private military contractors. Through his binoculars, he could make out figures in tactical gear, scanning the forest below with optical equipment. "We need to move," Sam said, shouldering his pack. "This ridgeline will be their next search area." As they prepared to leave their temporary shelter, the husky suddenly perked up and began wagging her tail. Following her gaze, Sam saw a figure emerging from the trees below, an older woman with grey hair tied back in a practical ponytail, wearing hiking clothes and carrying a walking stick that looked more like a weapon than a mobility aid. "Martha," Sam said, recognizing his nearest neighbor despite the distance. Martha Henley had somehow tracked them across miles of wilderness, and from her purposeful approach, it was clear she had business to discuss. They made their way down to meet her, the husky bounding ahead with obvious joy at seeing a familiar face. Martha greeted the dog with gentle hands and knowing eyes, then turned her attention to Sam and Danny with the kind of direct assessment that came from a lifetime of ranching in hard country. "Figured you might be up here," Martha said without preamble. "Had visitors at my place this morning asking questions about you, Sam. Official-looking types with federal badges and attitudes to match." Her weathered face creased with concern. "They wanted to know about your habits, your routines, whether you had family visiting." Didn't much like the answers I gave them. Sam felt the net tightening around them. If federal agents were canvassing his neighbors, it meant the conspiracy went deeper than just private contractors. Someone with official authority was either involved or had been convinced to provide support. "What did you tell them?" Sam asked. "Told them you kept to yourself, didn't have visitors, and hadn't seen you in weeks. Also mentioned that asking questions about veterans in these parts wasn't likely to make them popular with the locals." Martha's smile was sharp as old barbed wire. "May have suggested they try the ranger station if they were looking for someone in particular." Danny stepped forward, and Sam saw Martha's eyes widen as she took in his appearance. The fresh bruises, the torn clothes, the unmistakable signs of recent captivity. Her expression shifted from cautious helpfulness to the kind of protective anger that had made frontier women legendary. "This your grandson?" she asked Sam, though the family resemblance made the question rhetorical. "Danny Calder," Sam confirmed. "And we're in more trouble than a few federal badges can solve." Martha nodded, as if she'd expected as much. "Figured that when I saw the helicopter. Haven't seen air support in these mountains since that meth lab bust 5 years back." She gestured toward a game trail that led deeper into the wilderness. "My late husband used to run hunting parties through this country. Know every camp, every shelter, every bolt hole between here and the Canadian border. If you need to disappear for a while, I can help with that." The offer was generous, but Sam could see the risk it posed to Martha. Helping them would make her a target, and at her age, she didn't deserve to be dragged into a fight that wasn't hers. "Can't ask you to do that," Sam said. "These people are dangerous, and they're not going to respect your age or your status as a civilian." Martha's laugh was dry as autumn leaves. "Son, I've been living alone on a mountain ranch for 15 years since my husband passed. Had bears in my chicken coop, wolves after my cattle, and more than one drifter who thought a lone woman was easy prey. I didn't survive all that by being afraid of a fight. The helicopter was circling closer now, its search pattern tightening around their general area. Soon, they would need to make a decision about their next move, and time was running out for careful deliberation. "There's an old hunting cabin about 6 miles north of here," Martha continued. "Haven't been used in years, but it's still solid. Solar power, well, water, enough supplies to last a week or two. More importantly, it's hidden in terrain that would take local knowledge to find." Sam weighed their options. They could continue running on their own, staying ahead of their pursuers through wilderness skills and determination. But Danny was already exhausted, and they had no supplies for an extended evasion. Martha's offer provided not just shelter, but the local knowledge that could make the difference between escape and capture. "What's the catch?" Sam asked, because in his experience, there was always a catch. "No catch," Martha said simply. "But I want to hear the whole story once we're somewhere safe. And if these federal boys are really as bad as they seem, I want to help you do something about it." The husky had been listening to this exchange with obvious intelligence, and now she moved to Martha's side and sat down, as if casting her vote for the offered assistance. Danny looked to Sam with questions in his eyes, but also with hope, the first real hope Sam had seen since finding him chained in that shed. Above them, the helicopter completed another sweep and began moving toward the eastern ridges. They had a window of opportunity, but it wouldn't last long. Professional search teams operated on the principle of persistent pressure. If one approach didn't work, they would try another and another until they either found their target or forced them into making a mistake. "All right," Sam decided. "But if this goes bad, you get out and don't look back." Martha shouldered her pack with the efficiency of someone who'd been hiking these mountains longer than Sam had been alive. "Won't go bad if we're smart about it. And being smart means not traveling in a group. I'll take a different route, meet you at the cabin after dark. Less chance of all of us being spotted together." As they prepared to split up, Martha pulled a small handheld radio from her pack and handed it to Sam. "Channel 7, but keep transmissions short and coded. If I say weather's changing, it means trouble heading your way." The old woman melted back into the forest with the sure-footed confidence of someone truly at home in the wilderness. Sam watched her go with a mixture of admiration and worry. In less than 24 hours, his carefully isolated existence had expanded to include a grandson he'd never known, and a neighbor whose loyalty might cost her everything. But as he led Danny toward the promised sanctuary, Sam realized that the weight of responsibility felt different this time. Instead of the crushing burden he'd carried after Afghanistan, this felt like purpose, something worth the risk, worth the fight, worth whatever sacrifice might be required. The husky ranged ahead of them, alert and confident, and Sam found himself grateful once again for the wounded animal that had led him back into the world of human connection. Sometimes, he reflected, salvation came in the most unexpected forms. The hunting cabin sat in a natural depression surrounded by towering pines, invisible from any direction until you were practically on top of it. Martha hadn't exaggerated its concealment. Even Sam's trained eye had trouble picking out the structure until they were within 50 yards. The building was old but solid, constructed with the kind of practical craftsmanship that prioritized function over appearance. Danny collapsed onto a rough-hewn bench beside the cabin door, his face gray with exhaustion. The 6-mile hike through difficult terrain had pushed him to his limits, but he'd never complained or asked them to slow down. Sam recognized that kind of quiet determination. It was a Calder trait, passed down through generations of people who'd learned to endure whatever life threw at them. The husky immediately began investigating the cabin's perimeter, her nose working overtime to catalog the scents and sounds of their new environment. Sam appreciated her thoroughness. In hostile territory, a dog's senses were often more reliable than human observation. Inside, the cabin was spartanly furnished, but well equipped. Solar panels provided enough power for basic lighting and communication equipment, while a hand-pumped well ensured fresh water. Canned goods and preserved supplies lined shelves built into the log walls, and a stone fireplace promised warmth without the telltale smoke of a wood stove. "This'll do," Sam said, settling his rifle in a corner where it would be quickly accessible. "Martha knows her business," Danny managed a weak smile. "Reminds me of the cabin Sarah and I used to visit when I was little, before everything went wrong with her addiction." His expression grew distant, lost in memories Sam had never been part of. "She used to tell me stories about my grandfather, who lived in the mountains, said you could track anything, survive anywhere, and that you'd taught her to be strong, even when she forgot how to use that strength." The words hit Sam harder than expected. During all those years of anger and disappointment, he'd never imagined Sarah might have spoken of him with anything but resentment. The idea that she'd preserved some positive memory of their relationship, even after everything that went wrong between them, stirred emotions he'd thought were long buried. "Tell me about her now," Sam said, settling into a chair across from Danny. "What's she like since she got clean?" Danny's face brightened with obvious affection. "Different, focused. She works double shifts at the hospital because she says helping people gives her purpose. And she's a good mom to Emma. That's my little sister. Really good. Patient and funny and fierce when she needs to be." He paused, then added quietly, "She talks about you sometimes. Wonders if you'd be proud of who she became." Before Sam could respond to that emotional gut punch, the radio Martha had given him crackled to life. Her voice came through the static, calm but urgent, weather's changing fast. Storm front moving in from the east. Sam was on his feet instantly, moving to the window. Through the trees, he could see lights moving in the distance, multiple sources spread out in what looked like a coordinated search pattern. Their pursuers had expanded their operation and were now conducting a systematic sweep of the area. "How many?" Danny asked, reading the tension in Sam's posture. "Hard to tell. At least 6 search teams, maybe more." Sam counted the lights, noting their spacing and movement patterns. "They're being methodical about it, which means they have time and resources to burn." The husky had positioned herself by the door, ears pricked and body tense. Her behavior suggested she could hear or smell something that hadn't yet registered with human senses, vesicles maybe, or the particular scent signature of armed men moving through the forest. Sam's military training kicked into analytical mode, assessing their tactical situation with cold precision. The cabin was well hidden, but not defensible if discovered. They had limited ammunition, no backup, and a civilian dependent who was in no condition for extended combat operations. Worst of all, they were operating on incomplete intelligence about their enemy's capabilities and intentions. The radio crackled again. "Multiple vehicles on Forest Service Road 247, heading your direction but moving slow, like they're checking turnoffs." Sam checked his map, correlating Martha's report with their current position. Road 247 ran roughly parallel to their location, about 2 miles east, which meant the search teams were working their way systematically through every possible hiding place in the area. "We need to talk about Sarah's files," Sam said, turning back to Danny. "Where would she hide them? And more importantly, who else might know about their location?" Danny rubbed his temples, thinking hard. "She's always been paranoid about digital security, especially since she got clean. Said addiction taught her that people would always try to use your weaknesses against you." He looked up at Sam with sudden understanding. "She wouldn't have hidden them anywhere connected to her normal life. Someplace only family would think to look. Family like who? Like you. She used to tell me stories about places you two went when she was young, before Mom died and everything changed. Fishing spots, hunting camps, places that meant something to both of you." Danny's voice carried a mixture of hope and uncertainty. "But I don't know those places." "She never took me there." Sam felt the weight of old regret settling on his shoulders. There had been good times with Sarah before his wife's death and his own descent into grief and alcohol. Weekend camping trips, fishing expeditions, quiet moments when she'd seemed to hang on his every word. But those memories had been buried under years of anger and disappointment, relegated to a past that felt like it belonged to someone else. "Willow Creek," Sam said suddenly, the memory surfacing with startling clarity. "There's a spot where the creek bends around a big granite boulder, forms a deep pool perfect for trout. Sarah caught her first fish there when she was 8 years old." Danny's eyes lit up with recognition. "She used to talk about that place, called it her thinking spot, said it was where she went when she needed to remember who she really was." The radio interrupted their conversation with Martha's voice, more urgent now. Vehicles stopped at the old logging road, men getting out with equipment. "You've got maybe 30 minutes before they reach your area." Sam made a decision that went against every tactical instinct he possessed. "We're going to have to split up. I need to get to Willow Creek and find those files. You need to stay here and wait for an opportunity to use that phone number Sarah gave you." "No way," Danny said, struggling to his feet. "We stay together. That's what families do." "Families also make smart decisions to protect each other," Sam countered. "You're in no condition for a night march through hostile territory, and I can move faster alone. Besides, if something happens to me, you're the only one who can get those files to the right people." Danny started to argue, but the sound of engines in the distance cut him off. Their window for debate was closing rapidly, and every minute spent discussing options was a minute their pursuers gained on them. "There's another option," Sam said, an idea forming as he studied the cabin's layout. "This place has been used by hunters for decades. That means there are probably old supply caches, emergency stores, maybe even escape routes built into the surrounding area." As if summoned by his words, the husky moved to a corner of the cabin where a loose floorboard created a small gap. She began pawing at the wood with obvious intent, whining softly as if trying to communicate something important. Sam pried up the floorboard to reveal a hidden compartment containing maps, emergency supplies, and what looked like communication equipment. Among the items was a hand-drawn map of the area showing not just the cabin's location, but a network of connected safe houses and supply caches spread throughout the mountains. Martha's husband was more than just a hunting guide, Sam realized, studying the map's professional detail. "This is a resistance network, built for exactly this kind of situation." Danny leaned over Sam's shoulder, examining the map with growing understanding. "Look at this notation here, emergency protocols. And these numbers, they look like radio frequencies." Before Sam could respond, the distinctive sound of helicopter rotors filled the air again, much closer this time. Through the cabin's small window, they could see searchlights sweeping the forest, working in coordination with the ground teams to eliminate any possible hiding places. The net was tightening, but now Sam had a better understanding of the game board. Martha and her late husband had prepared for exactly this kind of scenario, and their preparations might be the key to not just survival, but striking back at the people who had turned his family into targets. "Change of plans," Sam said, folding the map and slipping it into his jacket. "We're not running anymore. We're going hunting." The husky's tail wagged once, as if she approved of this new direction. Outside, the searchlights continued their methodical sweep, but inside the cabin, the balance of power was beginning to shift. Sam Calder was no longer just a target. He was becoming what his enemies should have feared from the beginning, a protector with nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. The hidden radio equipment proved to be more sophisticated than Sam had expected, military grade. Transceivers with encryption capabilities and access to frequencies that weren't available to civilian operators. Martha's husband had clearly been more than a simple rancher, and the implications of that revelation added new dimensions to their situation. Sam tuned the radio to one of the emergency frequencies marked on the map and was rewarded with immediate chatter, coded communications between the search teams that revealed both their locations and their operational structure. These weren't federal agents conducting a standard manhunt. The communication protocols, call signs, and coordination patterns were all wrong for legitimate law enforcement. Private contractors, Sam concluded, listening to the radio traffic with the analytical ear of someone who'd worked with such groups in Afghanistan. Well-funded, well-equipped, but operating outside official channels. Danny joined him at the radio, his face grim as he processed the implications. Which means they can do things federal agents couldn't get away with. No oversight, no accountability. Also means they're vulnerable in ways federal agents wouldn't be, Sam added, his tactical mind already working through possibilities. They're here illegally, using equipment and methods that can't stand up to scrutiny. If we can force them into the light, expose what they're doing. The radio crackled with a new transmission that made both men freeze. A voice Sam didn't recognize was speaking with cold professionalism. Base, this is Hunter 1. No sign of primary targets at grid reference 77 Alpha. Moving to next search quadrant. But it was the response that chilled Sam's blood. Copy Hunter 1. Be advised, secondary asset has been secured. Package is en route to holding facility. Danny grabbed Sam's arm, his face white with terror. Secondary asset. That's Sarah. They found her. Sam felt the familiar surge of combat adrenaline, the mixture of rage and focus that had carried him through the worst moments of his military service. But this time, the stakes were personal in a way they'd never been before. This wasn't about completing a mission or protecting fellow soldiers. This was about family, about the daughter he'd failed once and couldn't afford to fail again. We need more information, Sam said, forcing himself to remain calm despite the fire burning in his chest. Location, timeline, how many people are guarding her, as if responding to his need. Martha's voice came through the radio on their emergency frequency. Package delivered to the old mining complex on Copper Ridge. Heavy security, multiple vehicles, helicopter support still active. Sam knew the location, an abandoned copper mine about 15 miles north of their current position. It had been closed for decades, but the infrastructure remained. Buildings, power lines, even a landing pad that had been used for heavy equipment transport. It was isolated, defensible, and far enough from civilization that screams wouldn't carry. It's a trap, Danny said, reading Sam's expression correctly. They're using Sarah to draw us in, just like they used me. Of course it's a trap, Sam agreed. But that doesn't change what we have to do. The husky had been listening to their conversation with the kind of focused attention that suggested she understood more than most people would credit. Now she moved to the cabin door and looked back at them expectantly, as if asking when they were going to stop talking and start moving. Sam studied the map more carefully, noting the terrain features around Copper Ridge. The mining complex sat in a natural bowl, surrounded by steep slopes, excellent for containing prisoners, but terrible for defenders if someone could reach the high ground. More importantly, the old mine had been connected to a network of service roads and maintenance tunnels that might provide covert access to the facility. There's something else, Sam said, pointing to a notation on the map. Emergency Cache 7 is marked right here, less than 2 miles from the mining complex. If Martha's husband was as thorough as he appears to be, that cache might contain exactly what we need for a rescue operation. Danny was studying the map with the intensity of someone whose life depended on understanding every detail. What kind of cache? Won't know until we get there, but given everything else we've found, I'm hoping for weapons, explosives, maybe even surveillance equipment. Sam folded the map and slipped it back into his jacket. Professional gear for professional problems. The radio chatter continued in the background, providing a running commentary on the search operation that was slowly converging on their area. The hunters were being methodical, but they were also growing frustrated by their lack of success. Frustrated operators made mistakes, and mistakes created opportunities. I'm going with you, Danny said, his voice carrying the kind of quiet determination that brooked no argument. You're barely standing, Sam pointed out. This kind of operation requires someone who knows Sarah, who can identify her from a distance, who can call her name and have her trust the voice she hears. Danny's eyes met Sam's with unflinching resolve. You're the tactical expert, but I'm the one she'll follow without question. Sam wanted to argue, but he could see the logic in Danny's reasoning. More than that, He could see the steel beneath the young man's exhausted exterior, the same stubbornness that had carried Sarah through recovery and carried Sam through 20 years of combat deployments. Family loyalty was both their greatest strength and their most dangerous vulnerability. All right, Sam decided. But we do this smart. No heroics, no unnecessary risks. We get in, get Sarah, and get out. If the situation goes bad, you follow my orders without question. Danny nodded, then moved to the window where he could watch the approaching searchlights. How long do we have before they reach this area? Sam checked his watch and calculated distances based on the radio chatter. Maybe 20 minutes. Enough time to gather what we need and start moving toward the cache. As they prepared to leave the cabin, Sam took a moment to appreciate what Martha and her husband had built. This wasn't just a network of safe houses and supply caches. It was a testament to the kind of quiet preparation that had always characterized mountain people. They understood that sometimes the authorities couldn't or wouldn't help, and they prepared accordingly. The husky was already at the door, her body language indicating she was ready to move. Sam shouldered his rifle and checked his ammunition, noting that he was down to less than 30 rounds. Whatever they found at the emergency cache would have to supplement their limited firepower. There's one more thing, Danny said as they prepared to leave. That phone number Sarah gave me, what if we use it not to call for help, but to set up our own trap? Sam paused, considering the tactical implications. Explain. If these contractors are monitoring communications, they'll intercept any call we make. But what if we want them to intercept it? What if we feed them false information about our location and intentions? The idea had merit, but it also carried enormous risks. Using their communications as bait could backfire spectacularly if the people on the other end of that phone number weren't who Sarah thought they were. We'll consider it, Sam said finally. But first, let's see what tools we have to work with. As they slipped out of the cabin and into the forest night, Sam felt the familiar weight of impending combat settling on his shoulders. But this time, instead of the hollow purposelessness that had characterized his military service, he felt something different, the fierce protectiveness of family loyalty, tempered by hard-won wisdom and focused by tactical necessity. Behind them, searchlights continued their methodical sweep of the forest. But the hunters were about to discover that they'd made a fundamental miscalculation. They'd assumed Sam Calder was just another broken veteran hiding from the world. They were about to learn that some men don't break, they just wait for something worth fighting for. The husky ranged ahead of them through the darkness, her pale coat almost ghost-like in the filtered moonlight. She moved with purpose and confidence, as if she understood that the time for running was over and the time for fighting had begun. Sam found himself grateful once again for the wounded animal that had led him back into the world of human connection. Sometimes, he reflected as they made their way toward the emergency cache. Salvation and damnation arrived in the same package. Tonight, he intended to find out which one he was carrying. Emergency Cache 7 was hidden beneath what looked like a natural rockfall, but Sam's trained eye could see the deliberate arrangement of stones that concealed a reinforced entrance. The husky had led them directly to it, confirming Sam's growing suspicion that she was far more than just a lost pet. She was part of the network, trained to know these locations and guide people to them. The cache itself was a marvel of preparation and paranoia. Sealed containers held weapons, ammunition, surveillance equipment, medical supplies, and communication gear that would have impressed military quartermasters. But it was the documents Sam found in a waterproof case that changed everything he thought he understood about their situation. Jesus Christ, Sam breathed, reading by the light of a red-filtered flashlight. The papers were copies of federal personnel files, surveillance reports, and what appeared to be operational summaries from multiple government agencies. Danny, you need to see this. Danny looked over Sam's shoulder as he spread the documents on a flat rock. The first file was labeled Operation Clean Slate and contained detailed profiles of federal agents who had gone missing over the past 2 years. The missing patient from Sarah's hospital, Agent Morrison, was just one of dozens. It's not a witness protection case, Danny said, his voice tight with understanding. It's something much bigger. Sam continued reading, his military experience helping him parse the bureaucratic language and operational details. What emerged was a picture of systematic corruption that reached deep into multiple federal agencies. Someone had been eliminating agents who had stumbled onto evidence of a conspiracy involving drug trafficking, weapons smuggling, and the murder of federal officers who couldn't be bought or intimidated. "Look at this," Sam said, pointing to a list of names. Agent Morrison wasn't just a random target. He was part of a task force investigating corruption in federal law enforcement. The other names on this list, they're all dead or missing. The husky whined softly, and Sam looked up to see her staring back toward the forest with tense alertness. Through the trees, he could see lights moving in their direction, not the systematic search pattern they'd observed before, but the rapid movement of people who knew exactly where they were going. They're not searching anymore, Sam realized with cold certainty. They're coming straight for us. Danny grabbed the most critical documents while Sam gathered weapons and ammunition from the cache. Among the equipment was a night vision scope that would give them a significant advantage in darkness, and enough C4 explosive to level a small building. But it was the final document in the case that stopped Sam cold. A personnel file with his own photograph clipped to the cover. According to the report, Samuel Calder was not just a random veteran hiding in the mountains. He was a person of interest in a federal investigation, suspected of having information about corrupt operations he'd witnessed during his military service. "They've been watching you for years," Danny said, reading over Sam's shoulder. "This whole thing, Sarah's discovery, my kidnapping, even the husky finding your camp, none of it was coincidence." The truth hit Sam like a physical blow. He'd thought he was protecting his family from a conspiracy Sarah had accidentally uncovered. In reality, he was the primary target, and his family had been used as leverage to draw him out of hiding. Every decision he'd made since finding the wounded husky had been anticipated and manipulated by people who understood his psychological profile better than he understood it himself. "The corruption investigation," Sam said, the pieces falling into place with horrible clarity. "In Afghanistan, I filed reports about supply chain irregularities, weapons that disappeared from inventory, contractors who seemed to have unlimited resources despite official budget constraints." Danny's face was grim as he processed the implications. "You documented evidence of the same network that's operating here. They've been waiting for the right pressure point to flush you out." The approaching lights were closer now, and Sam could hear vehicles moving along the Forest Service roads. But instead of panic, he felt a strange sense of relief. For 20 years, he'd been carrying the weight of suspicions he'd never been able to prove, doubts about operations that had never made sense, guilt over fellow soldiers who died in circumstances that felt wrong. Now finally he knew his instincts had been correct. "How many people do you think are involved?" Danny asked as they prepared to move. Sam studied the documents one more time before securing them in his pack. Based on this, at least 3 federal agencies, multiple private contractors, and probably local law enforcement in several states. "We're not dealing with a conspiracy, we're dealing with a shadow organization that's been operating inside the government for years." The husky had moved to the edge of their position and was now looking back at them with obvious urgency. Her message was clear. Whatever was coming, it would be here soon, and they needed to be gone before it arrived. "The mining complex," Sam said, making a decision that went against every tactical principle he'd learned. "We're not going there to rescue Sarah. We're going there because it's where they want us to go." Danny stared at him in confusion. "But if it's a trap, then we spring it on our terms instead of theirs." Sam shouldered his pack and checked his weapons. "They've been manipulating us from the beginning, using our family loyalty against us. But manipulation is a two-way street, and they've made one critical mistake, which is, they assumed I'm still the broken veteran who came home from Afghanistan 20 years ago. They're about to learn that some lessons only get learned through experience." Sam's voice carried the cold certainty of someone who'd finally found clarity in chaos. They wanted to draw me out? Fine. But they're going to discover that when you hunt a predator, sometimes you become the prey. As they moved through the forest toward Copper Ridge, Sam felt his tactical mind shifting into the analytical mode that had kept him alive through multiple combat deployments. The documents had revealed not just the scope of the conspiracy, but its weaknesses, the need for secrecy, the reliance on manipulation rather than direct confrontation, the assumption that their targets would remain reactive rather than proactive. "There's something else," Danny said as they walked. "That phone number Sarah gave me, what if it's not a contact for help? What if it's a way for them to track us?" Sam had been thinking the same thing. Everything about their situation suggested layers of deception and misdirection. The phone number could be legitimate, but it could just as easily be another tool for manipulation. "We'll use it," Sam decided, "but not the way they expect." Behind them, the lights had reached the cache location, and Sam could hear the sounds of men discovering their hiding place. Radios crackled with reports and new instructions, but the tone had changed from methodical searching to something closer to alarm. Their pursuers were beginning to understand that they were no longer hunting isolated civilians. The mining complex appeared ahead of them, sprawling across a plateau like an industrial scar against the mountain landscape. Security lights illuminated the perimeter, and Sam could count at least a dozen vehicles parked around the main buildings. But instead of intimidation, the sight filled him with grim satisfaction. "That's a lot of resources for a simple kidnapping," he observed. "Which means whatever Sarah discovered, it's worth killing for." Danny checked the weapons they'd taken from the cache, his movements showing more confidence than Sam had seen since finding him in the shed. "What's the plan?" Sam studied the mining complex through his binoculars, noting guard positions, vehicle placements, and potential entry points. But more importantly, he was thinking about the psychology of their enemies, people who had gotten comfortable with manipulation and intimidation, who had never faced direct confrontation from someone with his particular skill set. "The plan," Sam said, settling into the tactical mindset that had carried him through the worst of Afghanistan, "is to remind them why predators fear cornered prey." The husky moved to his side, her pale coat almost luminous in the moonlight. For the first time since this ordeal began, Sam felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be, doing exactly what he was meant to do. The manipulation was over. The hunting was about to begin. The mining complex spread across the plateau like a fortress of rusted steel and concrete, its industrial bones stark against the mountain landscape. From their concealed position on the ridge above, Sam counted 15 vehicles, at least 20 armed personnel, and enough sophisticated equipment to outfit a small military unit. This wasn't just a kidnapping operation. It was a command center for something much larger. "There," Danny whispered, pointing toward one of the main buildings. Through a lighted window, they could see a figure that had to be Sarah, the right height and build, moving with the careful restraint of someone under guard. "Second floor, corner office." "She's alive." Sam adjusted his night vision scope and confirmed the identification. Sarah was indeed alive and appeared unharmed, though she was clearly being held under close supervision. 2 guards were visible in the room with her, and Sam could see others stationed at various points throughout the complex. "Professional setup," Sam observed, cataloging defensive positions and escape routes with the analytical precision of someone who'd planned similar operations from the other side. "But they're configured for keeping people in, not for keeping attackers out." The husky had positioned herself at the edge of their hiding place, her body tense and alert. Every few minutes, she would turn her attention to different sections of the complex, as if she was tracking movement patterns and guard rotations. Sam was beginning to understand that she wasn't just an ordinary dog. She'd been trained for reconnaissance, probably by Martha's husband, as part of his resistance network. Danny pulled out the documents they'd retrieved from the cache, studying them by the dim light of a red-filtered flashlight. "According to this, The mining complex has been used as a staging area for operations across the Pacific Northwest. Drug distribution, weapons trafficking, elimination of federal witnesses, all coordinated from here. Sam felt a cold certainty settle in his stomach. The scope of the conspiracy was larger than he'd imagined, and Sarah's discovery at the hospital had threatened to expose years of carefully orchestrated criminal activity. No wonder they'd been willing to mobilize this many resources to contain the situation. "There's something else," Danny continued, his voice tight with concern. "This document mentions a timeline. They're planning to move operations to a new facility within the next 48 hours. After that, all evidence here gets destroyed, along with any witnesses," Sam added grimly. The implication was clear. Sarah, Danny, and himself were all loose ends that needed to be eliminated before the operation relocated. Time was running out faster than he'd realized. Sam pulled out the radio equipment they'd taken from the cache and began scanning frequencies, looking for the communication channels their enemies were using. It didn't take long to find them, the same professional chatter he'd been monitoring earlier, but now with increased urgency and references to accelerated timelines. "Base, this is Overwatch. Perimeter secure, no movement detected in sectors 7 through 12. Copy, Overwatch. Be advised, cleanup crew arrives at 600. All packages need to be processed before then." Danny's face went white as he processed the meaning of that transmission. Cleanup crew. They're not planning to relocate. They're planning to eliminate everything and everyone. Sam checked his watch. It was just past midnight, which gave them less than 6 hours before the situation became irreversible. But as he studied the complex through his scope, a plan was beginning to form, not just for rescue, but for something more ambitious. "That phone number Sarah gave you," Sam said suddenly. "We're going to use it, but not the way they expect." Danny pulled the piece of paper from his pocket, Sarah's careful handwriting barely visible in the dim light. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking that if this number connects to a legitimate federal contact, then we need to get evidence to them before the cleanup crew arrives. And if it connects to the conspiracy, then we're going to feed them information that serves our purposes instead of theirs." Sam pulled out his own phone, a basic model he'd been saving for emergencies, and began setting up for the call. But instead of dialing immediately, he spent several minutes preparing, using techniques he'd learned in military intelligence for conducting communications under hostile conditions. "Before we make this call," Sam said, "we need to understand what we're trying to accomplish. If we can't rescue Sarah tonight, then our priority becomes getting evidence of this conspiracy to someone who can act on it." Danny nodded, though Sam could see the pain in his eyes at the thought of leaving Sarah in enemy hands even temporarily. "The documents from the cache, they're enough to expose the whole operation." "More than enough, but only if they reach the right people. And right now, we don't know who the right people are." Sam studied the mining complex one more time, noting details that might be crucial for the plan forming in his mind. "That's what this phone call is going to determine." The husky suddenly perked up, her ears swiveling toward a sound Sam couldn't detect. But within seconds, he heard it too, the distant sound of helicopter rotors growing steadily louder. Through his scope, he could see increased activity around the complex as guards took positions and vehicles moved into defensive formations. "They're expecting company," Sam realized. "The cleanup crew is arriving early." As the helicopter approached, Sam could see it was a military transport, the kind used for moving large numbers of personnel quickly and quietly. This wasn't just about eliminating witnesses anymore. This was about shutting down the entire operation and relocating it somewhere even more secure. "We're out of time," Danny said, stating the obvious. Sam made a decision that went against every cautious instinct he'd developed over 20 years of survival in hostile territory. "No, we're not. We're exactly where we need to be, when we need to be here." He pulled out the C4 explosive they'd taken from the cache, along with the detonators and timer mechanisms. If they couldn't rescue Sarah immediately, they could do something else. They could ensure that the evidence of the conspiracy survived, even if they didn't. "What are you planning?" And Danny asked, though his tone suggested he already knew he wasn't going to like the answer. "I'm planning to give them exactly what they think they want," Sam said, his voice carrying the cold determination of someone who'd finally found a worthy enemy. "They want me to walk into their trap? Fine, but I'm going to make sure that when the trap closes, it takes them down with it." The helicopter was circling the complex now, preparing to land on the makeshift helipad near the main building. Through his scope, Sam could see armed figures moving into position around the landing zone. Not the contractors who'd been pursuing them, but military personnel in full tactical gear. "Federal agents?" Danny asked hopefully. Sam studied the newcomers through his night vision scope, noting their equipment, movement patterns, and coordination with the existing security force. "No, these are the people the federal agents were investigating. The ones who've been eliminating witnesses and covering up evidence." As the helicopter touched down and disgorged its passengers, Sam began setting charges on key structural points around the mining complex's perimeter. He worked with the methodical precision of someone who'd done this before, and placing explosives where they would do maximum damage to infrastructure while minimizing risk to any prisoners being held inside. "The phone call," Sam said, handing Danny the prepared device. "Make it now, while they're distracted by the new arrivals. Tell whoever answers that Samuel Calder has evidence of Operation Clean Slate and wants to arrange a meeting." Danny's hands shook slightly as he dialed the number, but his voice was steady when the call connected. Sam could only hear one side of the conversation, but it was enough to confirm his suspicions about the true nature of their situation. "This is Danny Calder. I have a message for Agent Morrison from Samuel Calder." "Yes, that's Samuel Calder. He has evidence of Operation Clean Slate and wants to arrange a meeting." "What do you mean, impossible?" "Agent Morrison is—" Danny's face went white as he listened to the response. Then he slowly hung up the phone and turned to Sam with dawning understanding. "Agent Morrison is dead. Has been for 3 days. The person I just talked to. They know who we are, where we are, and they're sending people to collect us right now." Sam felt the final piece of the puzzle click into place. The phone number wasn't a legitimate federal contact. It was part of the trap, designed to flush out anyone who might have evidence of the conspiracy. Sarah hadn't known she was walking them directly into enemy hands, but as Sam watched the increased activity around the mining complex, he realized that their enemies had made one critical miscalculation. They'd assumed he would try to negotiate, to find a safe way out of an impossible situation. They hadn't considered that sometimes the only way out was through. "Time to go," Sam said, shouldering his rifle and checking the detonator one final time. "We've got a family to save and a conspiracy to expose." As they began their descent toward the mining complex, the husky ranged ahead of them with the confident purpose of an animal that knew exactly what was expected of her. Behind them, on the ridge they'd just left, Sam could see new lights approaching, the people who'd responded to Danny's phone call. Closing the trap they thought would end the threat to their operation. They were about to discover that some traps work both ways, and that sometimes the most dangerous prey is the kind that refuses to run. The mining complex's perimeter fence was designed to keep casual trespassers out, not to stop someone with military training and serious intent. Sam cut through the chain link with wire cutters from the cache, creating an entry point hidden in the shadows between two security lights. The husky slipped through first, her pale coat nearly invisible in the darkness as she scouted ahead for guards and obstacles. Danny followed close behind, moving with surprising stealth for someone who'd been chained in a shed 3 days earlier. The young man had found reserves of strength and determination that reminded Sam powerfully of Sarah at that age, stubborn, brave, and willing to risk everything for the people they loved. "Guard patrol, 2 o'clock, Sam whispered, spotting movement near the main building. 2 men in tactical gear were making their rounds with the casual confidence of people who didn't expect trouble. That overconfidence was about to become their biggest disadvantage. They moved through the complex like ghosts, using the industrial infrastructure for concealment and staying clear of the obvious sight lines that the security setup was designed to monitor. Sam's military training had taught him to think like both attacker and defender, and he could see that whoever had planned this security arrangement was more focused on keeping people contained than keeping attackers out. The building where they'd spotted Sarah was a 3-story administrative structure that had probably housed the mine's management offices back when the facility was operational. Now it served as a command center for something much darker. Through the windows, Sam could see sophisticated communication equipment, multiple computer workstations, and enough personnel to suggest this was the nerve center of the entire operation. "Second floor, a corner office," Danny confirmed in a whisper, pointing to the lighted window where they'd seen Sarah earlier. "How do we get up there without triggering every alarm in the complex?" Sam studied the building's exterior, noting fire escapes, utility access points, and architectural features that could provide concealment. The structure was old, but solid, built in an era when industrial buildings were constructed to last. More importantly, it predated modern security systems, which meant there would be ways in that the current occupants might not have considered. Service entrance on the east side, Sam decided, probably leads to maintenance areas and stairwells that aren't part of the main security grid. As they made their way around the building, the husky suddenly froze and looked back toward the perimeter. Through the darkness, Sam could see new lights approaching, vehicles moving fast along the access road, with the kind of urgency that suggested their phone call had indeed been tracked and traced. "Company's coming?" Sam observed grimly. "We've got maybe 10 minutes before this place is crawling with reinforcements." They reached the service entrance to find it secured with a modern electronic lock that would have stopped most intruders. But Sam's combat experience had included more than just shooting. He'd learned to adapt, improvise, and overcome obstacles using whatever tools were available. The lock yielded to a combination of wire cutters, electrical tape, and basic knowledge of security system vulnerabilities. Inside, the building was a maze of converted offices and improvised workspaces. Computer monitors cast blue light across maps and documents, while communication equipment hummed with constant activity. Sam could hear voices from different parts of the building, not the casual conversation of people at ease, but the clipped professional exchanges of operators under pressure. "They know we're here," Danny said, noting the increased activity around them. "Good," Sam replied, checking the detonator in his pack. "Let them know. It's too late for them to change their plans, but it might make them hurry, and hurried people make mistakes." They found the stairwell Sam had hoped for, a utilitarian passage that connected the building's 3 floors without passing through the main corridors where security would be heaviest. As they climbed toward the 2nd floor, Sam could hear voices becoming more distinct, including one that made Danny stop in his tracks. "That's Sarah," he whispered, pointing toward a door marked with the office number they'd seen from outside. Through the thin walls, they could hear Sarah's voice, not the broken pleas of a victim, but the angry, determined tone of someone who was refusing to be intimidated. She was arguing with her captors, demanding to know what had happened to Danny, and insisting that whatever they thought she knew, they were wrong about her willingness to cooperate. "She's okay," Sam said, feeling a weight lift from his chest. "She's fighting them." Danny started toward the door, but Sam caught his arm. "Wait, we need to know how many people are in there, what the room layout looks like, and what our exit strategy is." Through a crack in the doorframe, Sam could see into the office. Sarah was seated in a chair, facing away from the door, her hands bound, but her posture defiant. 2 guards flanked the room, while a 3rd man, clearly the one in charge, sat behind a desk facing her. All 3 were armed, but their weapons were holstered or set aside, suggesting they felt secure in their control of the situation. That sense of security was about to be their undoing. Sam hand-signaled to Danny, indicating the positions of the guards and the plan for entry. It was a simple assault, fast, violent, and designed to overwhelm the enemy before they could react effectively. Danny nodded his understanding, though Sam could see the tension in his face at the prospect of his first real combat. "Remember," Sam whispered, "speed and aggression are our allies. Don't hesitate, don't think, just move." The husky had positioned herself by the stairwell, where she could provide early warning if reinforcements approached from below. Her ears were pricked forward, tracking sounds from throughout the building, and Sam trusted her senses more than any electronic surveillance system. Sam took a deep breath, feeling the familiar calm that settled over him before combat. Time seemed to slow as his training took over, analyzing angles of fire, calculating distances, and preparing for the explosive violence that was about to unfold. He kicked the door open, with enough force to splinter the frame, rolling left as he entered, while Danny went right. The element of surprise was total. The guards had been focused on Sarah, not expecting an assault from behind. Sam's first shot took down the guard nearest the window, while Danny tackled the second one before he could draw his weapon. The man behind the desk, middle-aged, soft-looking, clearly more administrator than operator, scrambled for a pistol in his desk drawer. But Sarah, even with her hands bound, threw herself sideways in her chair, toppling it and creating enough distraction for Sam to cross the room and press his rifle barrel against the man's temple. "Don't," Sam said quietly, and something in his voice made the man freeze with his hand halfway to the weapon. "Sarah," Danny said, moving quickly to untie her bonds. "Are you hurt?" "Danny!" Sarah's voice cracked with disbelief and relief as she saw her son alive and free. "How did you, Sam?" For a moment, father and daughter stared at each other across 20 years of separation and regret. Sam saw his own features reflected in her face, along with traces of the little girl who used to follow him around his grandfather's ranch. But more than that, he saw strength, the same determined resilience that had carried her through addiction and recovery. "Hello, Sarah," Sam said simply. "We need to go. The reunion would have to wait." Through the building's walls, they could hear increased activity, shouted orders, running footsteps, and the distinctive sound of vehicles arriving outside. Their window for escape was closing rapidly. "The documents," Sarah said urgently as Danny finished untying her hands. "I found more evidence, proof of everything Agent Morrison was investigating. It's hidden in—" "Later," Sam interrupted, though he was grateful to learn that Sarah had been thinking tactically even while captive. "Right now, we focus on getting out alive." The man behind the desk had remained motionless during their exchange, but Sam could see calculation in his eyes, the look of someone waiting for an opportunity to turn the situation to his advantage. That patience suggested professional training and experience with hostage situations. "What's your name?" Sam asked, increasing the pressure of the rifle barrel against the man's skull. "Colonel Marcus Webb," the man replied with the kind of calm that came from years of military service. "Retired Army Intelligence. And you're Master Sergeant Samuel Calder, though I suppose it's just Sam now." The familiarity in Webb's voice sent chills down Sam's spine. This wasn't a random encounter. Webb knew who he was, knew his service record, and had probably been planning this confrontation for longer than Sam realized. "You've been watching me," Sam said, stating the obvious. "For years. Ever since you filed those reports from Afghanistan about supply irregularities and missing equipment. Did you really think we wouldn't notice when someone started documenting evidence of our operations?" As Webb spoke, Sam could hear the approaching footsteps in the hallway outside. Their conversation was about to be interrupted by people with guns and orders to eliminate witnesses. The final confrontation was beginning, and Sam realized that everything up to this point had been preparation for a moment that had been 20 years in the making. The hallway erupted with the sound of boots on metal stairs as tactical teams converged on their position from multiple directions. Sam quickly assessed their situation. Second floor of a 3-story building, limited exits, and professional operators who knew the terrain better than he did. But he also had advantages. Surprise was gone, but initiative remained. And desperate people, with nothing to lose, could accomplish things that seemed impossible to those who fought by rules. "Window," Sam ordered. motioning Sarah and Danny toward the corner office's large window that faced the rear of the complex. "There's a fire escape." Colonel Webb smiled with cold satisfaction as he heard his reinforcements approaching. "You're too late, Calder. This operation has been 20 years in the making. Your interference tonight is nothing more than a minor inconvenience." Sam kept his rifle trained on Webb while helping Sarah to her feet. Up close, his daughter looked older than her years, marked by the struggles she'd endured, but her eyes held the same fierce intelligence he remembered from her childhood. Whatever had happened to her during their years apart, it hadn't broken her spirit. "The fire escape is blocked," Sarah said, looking out the window. "They've got people positioned to cover all the exits." Through the glass, Sam could see muzzle flashes and tactical lights as more teams took positions around the building. Webb's people had learned from their earlier encounters. This time, they weren't taking chances with half measures or assumptions about their target's capabilities. The door to the office suddenly splintered inward as someone applied a breaching charge from the hallway. Sam spun and fired 3 quick shots through the opening, buying them precious seconds as the assault team regrouped. But he could hear more footsteps on the stairs and the sound of helicopters approaching from outside. "Danny!" Sam called out. "Remember that C4 I placed around the perimeter?" Danny's eyes widened with understanding. "You're going to bring down the building?" "Just the parts we don't need," Sam replied, pulling out the detonator. "Sometimes the best way out of a trap is to change the shape of the cage." Webb's confident expression faltered as he realized what Sam was planning. "You'll kill us all." "Maybe," Sam acknowledged, "but at least I'll take you with me." The explosion, when it came, was precisely controlled. Shape charges that Sam had placed to collapse specific sections of the building while leaving the central structure intact. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The main stairwell pancaked downward, trapping the assault teams on the ground floor, while emergency lighting failed and plunged much of the complex into darkness. In the chaos that followed, Sam grabbed Webb by his collar and hauled him toward the window. "You want to survive this? Then you're going to help us get out of here." "I'm not going anywhere with you," Webb snarled. But his bravado was undermined by the very real possibility that his own building might collapse around them. Sarah had found a length of rope in the office, probably left over from the building's original mining operations, and was already securing it to the window frame. "Fire escape is damaged but still attached," she reported. "We can rappel down if we're careful." Danny moved to help his mother with the rope, while Sam kept watch on both Webb and the doorway. Through the smoke and debris, he could hear voices calling out damage reports and new tactical assignments. Webb's people were professional enough to adapt quickly to changing circumstances, but the explosions had bought precious time. "There's something you need to know," Sarah said as she tested the rope's strength. "Agent Morrison, before he disappeared from the hospital, he gave me more than just that phone number. He gave me a flash drive with copies of everything he'd discovered about the corruption network." Sam felt hope flare in his chest. "Where is it?" "Hidden in Emma's stuffed rabbit. I left it with the babysitter when this all started." Sarah's expression was grim with understanding. "If we don't survive this, at least there's still evidence that can expose them." Webb laughed bitterly. "Evidence? You think anyone will believe the word of a recovering addict and a paranoid veteran against the testimony of decorated federal agents? You're more naive than I thought." "Maybe," Sam acknowledged. "But dead conspirators can't testify either." The sound of rotors was getting louder, and through the window, Sam could see a helicopter approaching with a searchlight that turned night into harsh, artificial day. But instead of panic, he felt the cold clarity that had carried him through the worst moments of his military career. "Sarah, Danny, go first. I'll follow with our friend here." Sam gestured toward Webb with his rifle. "He's our insurance policy until we're clear of the complex." Sarah hesitated, clearly reluctant to leave her father behind after just finding him again. "Sam, there's so much I need to tell you, so much I need to explain about what happened between us." "Later," Sam said gently, but with finality. Right now, we focus on making sure there is a later. As Sarah and Danny disappeared out the window and began their descent, Sam could hear new movement in the hallway, people climbing over the debris from his explosions, determined to complete their mission despite the obstacles. Webb's operation was too important to abandon just because the building had become unstable. "You know this won't end here," Webb said as Sam forced him toward the window. "Even if you escape, even if you expose some of what we've been doing, the network is too large to destroy. We have people in every agency, every level of government." "Maybe," Sam replied, positioning Webb at the window. "But networks have a weakness that individual operators don't, which is they depend on secrecy and cooperation. Once you start cutting the connections, the whole thing falls apart." Sam smiled grimly as he prepared to follow his family down the rope. "And I've gotten very good at cutting connections." The helicopter's searchlight found them just as they began their descent, turning the side of the building into a stage lit for a deadly performance. But Sam had planned for this moment, and as bullets began to impact the building around them, he triggered the second set of charges he'd placed. Earlier, the explosion that followed wasn't designed to bring down structures, it was designed to eliminate vehicles and create enough chaos to cover their escape. Fuel tanks erupted in brilliant fireballs, communication equipment disappeared in showers of sparks, and the carefully organized tactical operation dissolved into confusion and damage control. By the time Sam's feet touched the ground behind the building, the mining complex was a maze of fire, smoke, and shouting voices. Webb was unconscious, whether from fear, injury, or simple shock. Sam couldn't tell, but he was alive and relatively intact, which was what mattered for their purposes. "This way," Sarah called, pointing toward a gap in the perimeter fence that the explosions had created. "There's a trail that leads down to the old access road." As they ran through the darkness beyond the complex, Sam could hear sirens in the distance, fire departments and emergency services responding to what must have looked like an industrial accident. The cover story would probably involve equipment malfunction or terrorist attack. Anything except the truth about what had really been happening at the abandoned mine. The husky appeared out of the forest ahead of them, her pale coat catching moonlight as she guided them towards safety. Sam had almost forgotten about their four-legged ally in the chaos of the assault, but she had clearly been waiting for them, ready to complete her mission of keeping the family together. Behind them, the mining complex burned against the Montana sky like a funeral pyre for 20 years of corruption and conspiracy. Sam knew that destroying one facility wouldn't end the network Webb had described, but it was a beginning, proof that even the most carefully planned operations could be disrupted by people willing to risk everything for justice. As they reached the safety of the forest and began their journey toward an uncertain but hopeful future, Sam felt something he hadn't experienced in decades, the satisfaction of a mission truly accomplished. 3 months later, Sam stood on the porch of his rebuilt cabin, watching the morning mist rise from the valley below. The structure was larger now, with additional rooms to accommodate family visits and a workshop where Danny had taken to learning traditional woodworking skills. The solitude Sam had once cherished remained, but it no longer felt like exile from the world. It felt like sanctuary shared with people who mattered. The husky, whose real name they'd learned was Scout, lay sprawled in a patch of sunlight, her thick coat gleaming with health and contentment. She'd earned her retirement from whatever covert activities Martha's husband had trained her for, though she still maintained the alert awareness of a professional who never truly goes off duty. "Grandpa Sam," Emma's voice drifted from inside the cabin, carrying the careful pronunciation of a 4-year-old who was still getting used to having an extended family. "Mama says breakfast is ready." Sam smiled, still adjusting to the title that had once seemed impossible. Emma was a miniature version of Sarah at that age, curious, fearless, and possessed of the kind of stubborn independence that ran in the Calder bloodline. She'd adapted to mountain life with the resilience of youth, treating their wilderness home as an adventure rather than an inconvenience. Inside the cabin, Sarah was setting plates on the table Danny had built from local pine, her movements efficient and purposeful. The nursing skills that had made her valuable at the hospital translated well to mountain living, where medical emergencies often had to be handled without outside help. She'd found work at a clinic in Whitefish, close enough for a daily commute, but far enough to maintain the privacy they all valued. "Any word from Martha?" Sarah asked as Sam joined them at the table. "She's doing well, enjoying her celebrity status as the woman who helped bring down a federal corruption network." Sam poured coffee from the pot that always seemed to be brewing in their household. "Though I think she's getting tired of the FBI agents who keep wanting to interview her about her husband's resistance network." The aftermath of the mining complex raid had unfolded exactly as Sam had hoped. The evidence Sarah and Agent Morrison had gathered, combined with Webb's desperate attempts to save himself through cooperation, had exposed corruption that reached into multiple federal agencies. Congressional hearings were ongoing, indictments had been filed, and careers that had seemed untouchable were ending in disgrace and prison. Sentences. Danny looked up from the mechanical drawing he'd been working on plans for a water wheel that would supplement their solar power system. "Any problems with the plea deal?" "Webb's lawyers are trying to renegotiate, but they don't have much leverage. His testimony has already implicated too many people for him to back out now." Sam studied his grandson with continuing amazement at the young man's resilience and growth. Agent Morrison's files contained enough evidence to corroborate everything Webb has said. The real Agent Morrison had been found alive in a private medical facility in Nevada, recovering from injuries that were much more severe than the cover story had suggested. His survival and subsequent testimony had been the final piece needed to unravel a conspiracy that had operated for over 2 decades. "What about the others?" "The people who got away?" Sarah asked, though Sam could tell she already knew the answer wouldn't be entirely satisfying. "Some will escape justice, at least in the legal sense. Networks this large always have people who are smart enough to insulate themselves from direct evidence." Sam met his daughter's eyes across the table. "But their operation is broken. The mining complex was a critical node, and destroying it has forced them to reorganize in ways that make them vulnerable to further investigation." Emma looked up from her coloring book, her young face serious with the weight of adult conversation she didn't quite understand. "Are the bad men gone?" "The ones who were hunting us are gone," Sam assured her, "and there are good people working to catch the rest." It was an oversimplification, but not untrue. The immediate threat to their family had been eliminated, and the broader conspiracy was now under attack from multiple directions. Sam had learned long ago that sometimes you had to be satisfied with partial victories, especially when the alternative was no victory at all. After breakfast, Sam and Danny took Scout for a walk along the ridge trail that had become their daily routine. The dog ranged ahead of them with obvious joy, no longer the wounded, desperate animal that had stumbled into Sam's camp 6 months earlier. She'd found her pack, just as Sam had found his family. "Have you thought about what comes next?" Danny asked as they walked. "I mean, this is great, but Sarah's going to want to rebuild her career eventually, and Emma needs to start school in a few years." Sam had been thinking about exactly that question. The mountain sanctuary they'd created was perfect for healing and regrouping, but it couldn't be a permanent solution for a family that included a young child and adults with careers and ambitions beyond survival. "Your mother and I have been talking about that. There's a house for sale in Whitefish, close to the hospital where she works. Big enough for all of us, but normal enough for Emma to have friends and activities." Sam paused, watching Scout investigate an interesting scent trail. "It would mean giving up some of the isolation I've gotten used to. Would you mind that?" Sam considered the question carefully. The solitude that had once been essential for his mental health no longer felt necessary. The ghosts that had driven him into the wilderness had been replaced by something more substantial and rewarding. The responsibility and joy of family connection. "No," he realized with mild surprise. "I think I'm ready for whatever comes next." As they turned back toward the cabin, Sam reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. A wounded dog had led him out of isolation and into the most dangerous period of his life, but also into the most meaningful. The conspiracy that had threatened his family was broken. The corruption that had haunted his military service was finally exposed. And the daughter he'd thought lost forever was building a new life that included him. It wasn't the ending Sam had expected when he'd first followed Scout's trail into the forest. But then the best outcomes rarely matched expectations. They exceeded them in ways you never saw coming. That afternoon, as Sarah helped Emma build a fort out of blankets, and Danny worked on his latest woodworking project, Sam sat on his porch with Scout at his feet and allowed himself to feel something he'd almost forgotten was possible. Contentment with the present and hope for the future. The mountains still kept their secrets, and he still kept his. But now those secrets felt less like burdens and more like wisdom earned through experience and shared with people who understood their value. Some wounds did heal, given enough time and the right kind of family to help with the healing. In the distance, a hawk circled over the valley, riding thermals with effortless grace. Sam watched its flight with the appreciation of someone who'd learned that freedom wasn't about being alone. It was about having something worth protecting and the strength to protect it. The wounded dog had led him home, just not to the home he'd expected. Sometimes, Sam reflected as the sun began its descent toward the western peaks, the best rescues were the ones where everybody saved everybody else.